Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us this morning. My name is Barbara Higgins. I'm the Director of Safety and Student Engagement at the San Diego County Office of Education, and I'm very, very pleased this morning to be able to share with you this presentation on Model SARB, Strategies and Tips for Nailing the Application. Our presenters today have a wealth of knowledge in this and many other topics, but particularly this one today, we have David Kopperud, who's an education programs consultant with the California Department of Education, and also Jennifer Gomeztrejo, who is a co-founder of Student Support Services Solutions Incorporated. So I know you're in for a nice, great information and a nice treat this morning. Jennifer, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to be with you today, and we're extra excited because of our topic. Today we'll be discussing the Model SARB recognition program. And our goal today is to really help everybody understand the revised application. It has been revised for this year based on a few new criteria that were added. And the purpose of today is really to help everyone understand those revisions and to provide some strategies and tips for nailing the application. Our goal is to have as many model SARBs as possible that serve as mentors across the state. So we're going to encourage you multiple times during today's presentation to apply to become a model SARB and to join that group. Let's go ahead and jump in. So we wanted to start with giving you some reasons for why you should apply to become a model SARB. Part of it has to do with receiving statewide recognition as a model program for attendance improvement during what's been a very difficult time. We know that it's not all about the recognition, but I think especially because of the work that everyone has been engaged in over the course of the last 20 months or so, it's really important to be recognized for all of those efforts and all of that hard work. And the win isn't just a win for the people who are applying, but for all of the stakeholders in the district. Also, we think a great reason to apply to become a model SARB is to share your exemplary practices that are contributing to chronic absent rate reduction and to improved student attendance and engagement. Part of what we want to do in our roles working on state SARB is to share out what people are doing that's working. Talk about those strategies and best practices that have been effective for you, so that we can create kind of a statewide toolkit for what other people could try as well. We also think it's important because we want to have model SARBs serve as leaders and mentors to other SARBs throughout the state. We want to build this network and this cohort of people who can support each other around the work of attendance. And we also think it's important because we want to highlight the important contributions of child welfare and attendance staff, as well as student services staff. Sometimes these are areas that get overlooked a little bit, especially in comparison to other areas like curriculum and instruction, which are also important. But I think especially during this time, part of what the pandemic has taught us is just how important the work of CWA and student services is, and to highlight that moving forward. Now, there are 4 model SARBs that have been recognized already in San Diego County. So let's call them out really quickly and congratulate them again for a job well done. Chula Vista Elementary School District, Escondido Union School District, Rosemont Union High School District, and San Diego Unified School District. So there are already 4 model SARBs in the San Diego County area. And if you are thinking about applying to be a model SARB, you can always reach out to them. Part of the agreement is that they're serving as mentors. So you can always reach out to them as you're going through your application for help and support with that process. But we would love to expand that list beyond just the 4 in San Diego. So we're really happy that you're with us. We're going to take you through the steps of the application, give you some strategies for maximizing your scoring so that you too can join this list of model SARBs in San Diego County. And part of what we also want to do today is kind of reduce any anxiety you might have about looking at the application and going through it. I know in the past, what we've been told by people, we know they have exemplary programs, but they haven't applied yet. And these are some of the responses we get. I don't have enough time. I have too many other duties. The application is complicated. I don't know if we're ready to apply for this yet. So we want to help kind of reduce that anxiety, share with you these tips and strategies for nailing the application, and answer any questions that you might have today. David and I are both readers and scorers and have been for years, so we can kind of help you with those little tips for maximizing that scoring and also kind of troubleshoot any questions that you might have. So just as an overview of what Model SARB is, for some of you who are joining us today that might not have as much history or background with it, It's a program that identifies and recognizes outstanding and innovative results-based school attendance and behavior improvement programs. So this program has been in place for a long time, sponsored by the California Department of Education and also co-sponsored by CASPA. And what we're doing is trying to identify outstanding SARBs who can serve as models and mentors for other SARBs in the state. We want people to assist each other in this work and share best practices as much as possible. So eligibility is really easy. As long as you are part of an LEA that is created and operated according to California Education Code 48321, you qualify. You don't have to meet any certain threshold in terms of chronic absence percentages or anything that was reported in the past on DataQuest. We just ask that you kind of follow the parameters of what's listed in California Education Code 48321. And to become a model SARB, if you're applying for the first time, fantastic. If you happen to be one of those 4 districts that was a model SARB in the past, just a reminder that the designation, you can apply every other year. So if you received recognition last year, you would need to wait a year. But for anyone who's new, welcome. We hope that you become a part of the model SARB family. In terms of the timeline for the model SARB program, so you can kind of backwards plan what's going to be happening, the application will be available shortly on the CDE website. What we're sharing with you is kind of information that has not been shared publicly yet, but we did want to share it through this conference. So thank you, Barbara, for the opportunity to do that. And you're getting kind of a preview of what other people have not yet had the chance to see. David and I did a couple of webinars through CASWA a couple days ago. You're receiving the same information today. And then the applications are due at the beginning of February 4th, 2022. So essentially you would have the rest of November, December, January to complete your application and make sure that it gets submitted electronically by February 4th. Then in February and March, state SARB members are going to read and score the applications based on an established rubric. And winners will be notified by March of 2022, whether they've received recognition or whether they haven't. And then all the awardees will be recognized during the state CASPA conference, which this year will be held May 11th through 13th in Northern California. Just some information background about formatting and things like that. Follow everything that's in the green box. Those are just some kind of general information. I think the most important information is in this kind of tan box in the middle here, the content areas. All of the content areas that we discussed today are required. In the past, there was some flexibility about what you could respond to. There were more sections, but we gave you some flexibility. This year, we reduced the number of content areas, but all of the content areas are required. And the key point here is that you need to score a 90 out of 100 to be recognized as a model SARB. So there's a pretty high threshold in terms of the scoring. We essentially, if you're thinking about it on a grading scale, it's kind of A work. But we want to, especially because you're going to serve as mentors to other people, we want to make sure that the quality of the application is really high. And again, we'll talk to you about how to maximize those points to meet that threshold of 90. When you're submitting the application, there will be a certification form. You submit the 4 content areas, and then you also have the opportunity to submit no more than 5 pages of supplemental materials. So if you're talking about an attendance campaign that you're really proud of, you could submit some information tied to that. If you want to talk about your extensive community resources and supports, you could provide a list or a brochure of the agencies that you're working with. If you have some particular data that you'd like to discuss or address, you can provide that as part of your supplemental work. So you do have a little bit of wiggle room there. And then again, it has to be completed and submitted by 4 p.m. on February 4th. In terms of the scoring process, all of the content areas will be scored numerically, and they're either going to fall into the excellent category, the adequate category, or the needs improvement category. Now, just based on the scoring and needing to have 90 out of 100 in order to be considered a model SARB, if you fall into the needs improvement category, the score is pretty low. So that's probably going to end up, eliminating you from consideration. For the most part, in terms of scoring, you want to be in the excellent or the adequate range. And there is a rubric that will be provided when CDE publishes it, so you can see exactly what the readers and scorers are looking for. In terms of approval, once everything's been scored, the names of the model SARB candidates will be provided at the state SARB meeting, and the state SARB will vote on that. And then after that, the notification will happen. So a representative from CDE will contact the Model SARB winners to congratulate them and invite them to come to the state CASPA conference. But a great thing also happens for applicants who don't meet the criteria. They will also be notified personally to discuss areas for improvement and to recommend a Model SARB mentor, because the idea is we don't just want it to be a one and done in the event that someone doesn't meet that threshold of 90 points. We really want them to make an improvement on the application and submit the following year. So there is that support there. In the scroll that's listed on the slide, it'll tell you the content areas and their point values. So content area 1 is worth 25 points, content area 2 is worth 40. So that's the one you probably want to concentrate a lot of your efforts on. Content area 3 is 25 points and content area 4 is 10 points for the total of 100. And as I mentioned, there is a rubric that will be attached to the application so you can see exactly where the scoring falls. A few words of wisdom for people who are entering into this process. You would want to recruit a team to assist with the writing of the Model SARB. So you don't just want to have one person do it. It's just like attendance work in a district or in an organization. You can't have one person who's responsible for all of it. It's a task that requires the expertise of a team. So you would want to have a team that would help support you, bringing in expertise about different steps of the process, making sure you have a fresh set of eyes to read the drafts of the application. So identify who those team members would be and bring them on board with you. We also would want to encourage you to highlight all of the amazing things that your SARB is doing. So this is not a time to be humble. It's not a time to be modest. This is the time to highlight all the fantastic things that are happening. And that's also part of why you want the team to kind of brainstorm all of those ideas. What you may think is routine for your district or for your charter school, for your organization, what you may think is routine is actually exceptional. So don't leave things out or don't, push things to the side and say, oh, it's probably no big deal, everyone's doing it. That's probably not the case. So make sure that you incorporate all of those great ideas. And the key point here is you are not competing against other SARBs. As I've mentioned before, you want to reach that 90 points or above, but you're not competing against each other. There is no magic number of model SARBs every year. It's not as though CDE says only 10 or only 15 and you're competing against each other. We don't want that. We want as many people as possible to be model SARBs. So you're not competing with each other. You're just trying to reach that threshold. And that's why we're encouraging you to reach out to each other, reach out to the model SARBs in your area, reach out to other colleagues who may be model SARBs and ask for their input. Maybe ask them to read a draft of the application. We're encouraging as many people as possible to become model SARBs. So you can work together collaboratively on that. And asking those model SARB mentors for advice is always a good way to go. Here is the full complete list of model SARBs from throughout the state. You'll notice that there's quite a variety here. Some are unified school districts, some are elementary districts, some are high school districts, some are consortiums where districts are working together. But I would take a look at this list. As I mentioned, you have 4 model SARBs in the San Diego County area, but there's a lot of other ones who are listed here. So maybe taking a look at this list to determine geographically which ones are close to you, or demographically which districts have similar student populations or serve similar groups of students. So here's just a few more to take a look at. We also have 4 county offices who have been designated as model SARBs. So El Dorado, Stanislaus, Sutter, and Tuolumne. So we have districts as well as county offices, but we would encourage you to take a look at this list and to reach out to them. Now, I'm not sure if we mentioned at the beginning, this PowerPoint will be made available through the conference website. So if you're taking pictures or screenshotting any of these slides, just know that this will be made available and added to the conference information. So you'll have access to this. And now I'm going to pass it over to David, who's going to start talking about the content areas in more specific detail. This is where we're going to give you some tips and pointers for how to maximize your points, maybe how to format pieces of this so that we can get you across that finish line and have you join the list of the model SARBs.
Okay, so the first area of the application is content area 1. It's a maximum of 3 pages and it's worth 25 possible points. So in this part of the application, you're going to give an overview of your student population. So we look at all these different racial and ethnic groups, and then we also look at different subpopulations within the district, like English learners, students with disabilities, foster youth, and homeless youth. And so the purpose of this is to kind of get a good view of what your district is composed of. And so this is the first content area that the reader will be reading, and the reader will be saying, trying to get a sense of the obstacles for good attendance that you have in your area, and what are the different student populations that you serve. For each student population, you're going to need to provide percentage of your student body is that student population, like homeless or African American, and what is the chronic absentee rate for each student group? What is the suspension rate for each student group? What is the dropout rate for each student group? And what is the graduation rate for each student group? However, if any of these groups are not numerically significant, then you don't have to report on them. You'll only have to address the numerically significant student populations for your LEA as described in your LCAP. Then there's two ways that you can describe your student population. You can do it as a narrative, or you can do it as a graphic. So if you do it as a narrative, you'll be writing sentences that are saying the overall student population in my district or county office is, what percentage African American, Hispanic, Asian, white, what percentage are English learners, students with disabilities, students experiencing homelessness, and so that the reader will get a good sense of the population that you're serving. Another way of doing that is with this graphic. And in the graphic form, you just can do a column with the different student populations that are numerically significant, then the percentage for those student populations, then the chronic absentee rate for those student populations, the suspension rate, the dropout rate, and the graduation rate. So another thing that you're going to be describing in Content Area 1 is the different language groups served by the SARB and to what extent the SARB membership reflects the population it serves. So, it'd be very appropriate if you have a large African American population that you have someone on the SARB that's African American. If you have a large Spanish speaking population, you should have someone that speaks Spanish on your SARB. You also go into specifics about what types of translation you provide to parents, guardians, and caregivers, and make sure that you provide that translation in letters, in phone calls, and in conferences, et cetera. So it's really important to show that you communicate in the language of the families in your district. And then also you need to describe what are the barriers to attendance for these student populations. We're going to talk about that a little bit on the next slide. And how SARB communicates and interacts in a culturally diverse environment. It's really important that we communicate and reach out to parents in a way that's friendly and welcoming. So in this particular example, we're looking at students experiencing homelessness. And so if you have a high percentage of students experiencing homelessness, we would expect you to describe what are the barriers for good attendance, because we're seeing really high chronic absentee rates for students experiencing homelessness. And some of those barriers the SARB might have to address are unstable housing, food insecurity, lack of clothing and school supplies, lack of transportation, trauma in the home, and medical needs for family members. So in your application, you would describe how does the SARB help students experiencing homelessness with these particular barriers to their attendance. Another thing to describe specifically in Content Area 1 is the specific measurable goals and objectives developed by the LEA to meet the needs of high-risk youth with persistent attendance and behavior problems. And you can include prevention and intervention activities, as well as goals to reduce dropout or suspension numbers. Discuss the use of other means of correction as responses to behavioral and attendance challenges instead of suspensions and expulsions. So in this area, you may find that you have a problem with disproportionate suspension rates. And that still comes under the purview of attendance, because one of the reasons students can miss school is due to suspension or expulsion. And it would be appropriate, if that's an issue in your district, that you describe how you're intervening to reduce suspensions and expulsions to improve your attendance for those students. and what are the various, and the best thing is to have measurable goals and objectives for your subgroups. Like for a particular subgroup, like homeless students, you're going to reduce their chronic absenteeism by 8% or something like that, to have a specific measurable goal, and you can see how you're moving towards reaching that goal. Data. Okay, it's important to have your chronic absentee rates, your dropout rates, and your data for in-school and out-of-school suspensions and expulsions. That data can be used to determine if you're meeting your goals and objectives. Also, we expect you to attach the SARB reports that were submitted to the county superintendent for the last 2 years. Education Code 48273 says that local SARBs have to report their basic outcomes to the county superintendent, and that would be at a minimum how many SARB referrals that you have during the year, and how many cases are referred for prosecution to the district attorney. And those 2 reports would not be counted in the 3-page limit for this section. Okay, Jennifer is going to go now and discuss with you content area 2, which is the most important part of the application because it has the most points possible. Jennifer.
So as David mentioned, in content area 1, this really sets the foundation and sets the stage. The readers and scores for this application come from across the state and may or may not be familiar with your district. So content area 1 really sets the stage to explain who your district is, what the composition is, what kind of supports you have, that culturally diverse environment, making sure that your SARB membership reflects your population, and your data and your goals. So that really sets the stage. Going into content area 2, which is the one I'm going to discuss, we're going to really dig into the daily work, everything that you do on a regular basis to address attendance, the systems you have in place, some of the support people that you have in place, and the strategies and best practices that you've implemented to support attendance improvement. So content area 2 is really the one, even though it's the most number of points, and that might seem a little bit overwhelming, it's what you do every day. It's what you're really good at. It's your work. It's the successes that you've had. So this gives you a really good opportunity to explain and share all of the amazing things that you're doing, and to share those practices with other SARBs. So this one is a maximum of 4 pages. And for this one, that's probably the most difficult part of content area 2, is not getting the information on paper, but editing it down to 4 pages. So this can be the challenge of content area 2. So in starting with content area 2, we want you to start with a description of the various tiers of support for attendance. So when we talk about attendance, a lot of times we frame it as a reference to multi-tiered systems of support, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So tier 1 being those universal supports, prevention, tier 2 being a little more targeted with early intervention and identification, and tier 3 being the most intensive supports. So you're going to kind of describe what that looks like within your LEA and who's responsible for activities within each tier. So say, for example, you talk about tier 1 and tier 2. Typically, those are functions at the school site level. So you would describe who's responsible for that. What do your teams look like? Who's a part of those teams? And as you get into tier 3, that tends to be more of district office support, and that might be a different group of people in collaboration with your community partners. So first and foremost, describe the tiers that you have in place, what those look like, and who is responsible for each part of that. You're also going to describe how staff implement the various prevention and intervention strategies to improve student attendance. So what does that look like, and what does that look like at the different levels? The next part is to describe who has responsibility at both the site and district levels for identifying, monitoring, and supporting groups of students who may not be participating on a regular basis or completing work in independent study. This second bullet is something that we added this year, obviously, because of the changes that happened as a result of the legislature and the new kind of rules and regulations around independent study. So we want to have some discussions and have you describe to us what those support mechanisms look like. The third part is the referral and early warning systems used to identify students with irregular attendance. So how are you identifying who those students are? Do you use your student information system? Do you contract with an outside company like A2A or RAWI or DAT, which is the system through Attendance Works? How do you establish those systems to identify students who need support? Do you have reports that are generated? Do you do dashboards? How does that play out? So you're going to describe that to us as part of the process. You're also going to describe how the SARB encourages schools to use your student information system to identify those students or those patterns. So what does that look like? Is it something that is done from the district level down? Is the district level providing the information to the school sites? Are school sites generating that information themselves? How does that get communicated? We'd also like you to discuss professional development that's been provided to staff to address trauma and other impacts of COVID-19. So many districts using their funds have done trauma-informed training. They've talked about social emotional learning. They've instituted wellness programs. So talk to us a little bit about the professional development that's been provided. Also discuss additional support that's been provided to assist students with unique needs. And by unique needs, we're specifically talking about students who are English learners, pupils with exceptional needs, pupils in foster care, and pupils experiencing homelessness. So have there been additional supports during this time period to assist? Has there been additional outreach people that have been hired? Maybe a part-time McKinney-Vento liaison is now a full-time liaison. Maybe you've added some community workers to assist with your pupils experiencing homelessness. So just talk a little bit about the support that's in place for that, or additional tutoring or additional resources. Recognition programs at the school site and district levels for good and improved attendance and positive behavior. So what does this look like at the site level? And maybe share something that you're doing at the district level. If your SARB recognizes families who've made improvements or students who've made improvements, you could talk about that too. So you could give us a few examples from school sites and then also give us some examples if you're doing something at the district level. And also as part of content area 2, we want to make sure that when you're describing your MTSS systems for attendance, you're describing as part of that procedures to provide timely truancy notifications. So there are those mandates and those requirements. How is that being done? Is that being done at a district level? Are the school sites responsible for sending those out? Do you contract with an outside company for that? But tell us a little bit about, when those go out, how you ensure that they are going out, who's responsible for that, describe that process. And typically, that's part of your tier 2 piece. So you would kind of, plug that in where appropriate when you're talking about that. How absences or lack of work completed for independent study, if applicable, activate an assessment of mental and social emotional health and needs. So if students are struggling in independent study, there's a piece of the legislation that requires this tiered re-engagement type plan. So how does that plan get instituted and how does it activate those mental and social emotional health needs and who gets involved with that process? How the LEA and the SARB provides outreach to students and their parents and guardians in languages other than English. So we know in the state of California, most of our districts are very diverse, but how are you reaching out and working through the MTSS? So not just at the SARB level when the SARB panel is with the family, but at the various levels leading up to it. So what does that look like when you're making those initial phone calls? Is translation available? When you're having parent conferences, is translation available? When you're doing SARB meetings, how does that outreach look? If you're doing home visits, are people who are conducting home visits bilingual? Are they able to provide information in languages other than English, whether it's resources or referrals? So talk a little bit about that piece. And then also how the LEA and SARB can monitor and support mental health and social emotional well-being of students during the school year. So including those categories we talked about before, pupils experiencing homelessness, pupils in foster care, pupils with exceptional needs, and English learners. So how is mental health and well-being supported for them, but also for students who may face discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicity, religion, gender identity, etc. So we know that the pandemic has been a struggle for students in many, many ways. They're exhibiting things like anxiety, depression, and are in need of additional support. Many districts have hired additional personnel to address that, whether it's in the form of additional social workers, school psychologists, counselors, So talking a little bit about what those supports look like. You may have implemented a new curriculum or a new program that you've done district-wide or within a school. And you may have some additional supports, again, for these different student populations. So you'll want to talk about this mental health and social emotional piece, because we know that this has been particularly challenging during this pandemic time. So just to kind of wrap up, content area 2 is really focused on the MTSS piece, describing tiers 1, 2, and 3. Within that, we're asking for specific information as it touches on those different tiers. When we talk about the outreach pieces and the truancy notifications, a lot of that falls into the tier 2 pieces. When we're talking about the recognition for good and improved attendance, that would be an example of probably more of a tier 1 piece. So within this, these bullet points are kind of trying to coach you about different information to put in the different parts of the tiered supports for attendance. So that's kind of with content area 2, what we're asking you to do. Because this content area has the most points, it also has the highest page number limit. So you have to do all of this within 4 pages. You can decide if you want to have the entire thing be narrative, or in the matter of formatting, you could have some graphics that show your MTSS and how different things fit in. And this may be the section where those additional supplemental pages, this may be where you want to highlight some of that information. So if you're talking about a particular program that you've implemented, or if you're talking about new staffing that's been added, or if you're talking about student recognition and programs, this might be where you want to refer and say, for an example of what this looks like, see the supplemental page 1 or 2. This might be where you want to throw that information in. But as David mentioned, because it does have the most points, this is where you want to concentrate your effort, your team that's writing and working on this. This is where you want to bring in the expertise of the school sites and the district and various pieces of the puzzle, people who are involved in the process. So that's content area 2. David's going to jump in with content area 3 now, which is going to focus more on the personnel piece.
Hi. Thank you, Jennifer. You did a great job. So we're going to talk a little bit about content area 3. It's not as extensive as content area 2. It's a maximum of 3 pages and it's worth 25 points. But in this particular content area, you talk about the collaboration that you've developed to deal with attendance and behavior issues in your district. And you're going to talk about attendance, staff roles and responsibilities, staff collaborations, because SARB is all about collaboration, both within your district and with others outside your district. And we're going to talk about the qualifications of your SARB members. How are they qualified by their credentials or their experience to help families in need? So in content area 3, you're going to specifically describe any new staff positions that have been added or modifications that have been made to staff roles and responsibilities to ensure that students with attendance or participation problems are identified as early as possible. Please list the applicable support services and interventions provided. So here's a chance to talk about what you've done specifically related to the challenges of COVID in your district. How have you changed things to provide for the needs of those families? Who has been given responsibility for evaluating the effectiveness of strategies implemented to reduce chronic absenteeism rates? It's really important that someone is kind of seen as the person accountable for reducing chronic absentee rates for both in-person students and independent study students, if you have independent study students. I think most of you do. Also, you will describe the professional development given to staff for their roles in supporting school attendance for in-person students and independent study students. This includes outreach approaches to families and other key adults, as well as supporting direct services to students. And I think I've seen a lot of districts that have done a good job of providing professional development to key staff to help families cope with COVID-19. The persons who are responsible for screening SARB referrals. It's important to say, who is it that screens referrals to SARB to evaluate the quality of the documentation for each case? Because if the documentation at the school level isn't good, then the case really should be referred to the SARB. This particular individual should ensure that the school has exhausted all other interventions prior to SARB referral It's even in the Ed Code now that when you refer a case to SARB, you have to be able to describe the interventions that were taken prior to the SARB referral. Also, you'll describe the representatives on the SARB and the agencies or organizations they represent. Be sure to show representation listed in Education Code 48321. We're going to see that on the next slide, but for local SARBs, there's a list in the Ed Code of people that should or could be on your SARB, and you're going to kind of use that list as a model for how you are providing services to families through the representation on the SARB panel. The attendance and commitment of SARB members. So it's not just to saying who's on your SARB, but what kind of attendance at SARB meetings do you have? What kind of commitment do you have from these different representatives? Indicate which SARB members meet regularly to combine their expertise and resources on behalf of the students referred to them, and how others might contribute on an as-needed basis. For example, special education representatives may be needed when cases are considered involving students with special needs. You may want school psychologists there, members of the IEP team, so that if you're dealing with a student that has exceptional needs, you can talk about that knowledgeably at the SARB meeting, and then the SARB can make a recommendation to the IEP team if they find that there's a particular obstacle to that student's attendance that maybe the IEP team should address. The roles and qualifications of members serving on the SARB, including specialists assigned to perform case management services for students and parents, guardians, and caregivers. So, do you have, for example, a school social worker or a school counselor on your SARB that has the appropriate credentials? It's important to have highly qualified experts on your SARB so that you can deal with all the possible barriers to attendance that the students may have. And there's here 2 different ways that you can meet the requirements of Content Area 3. You can do it in a narrative form where you describe in paragraphs all the different agency representatives that you have in your SARB, who's representing the Department of Children and Family Services, what kind of license or credential that person has. You can talk about the representative from the special education department. You can talk about how often these people attend SARB meetings. Or you can do it graphically. If you do it graphically, you can have a column that just lists all the different types of representatives you have, what agencies they're representing, what credentials or licenses those individuals have, and what their role is on the SARB, because you'll have someone that has the role of SARB chairperson. Also, on the final column, you'll have whether that particular representative is attending on a regular basis or attending on an as-needed basis. And then specific things that you'll describe in Content Area 3. The process used by the County Board of Education to certify the supervisor of attendance pursuant to Education Code 48245. So we really want to encourage implementation of that statute in the Ed Code. And that statute says that supervisors of attendance need to be certified for their work by the county boards of education. And so in this content area, you would describe how that process is carried out in your county and how your supervisor of attendance was certificated by the County Board of Education. How the SARB members work collaboratively to diagnose problems, recommend solutions, and conduct follow-up. That follow-up piece is really important because you can't expect that necessarily that the family will just follow all your directives. You want to be able to show how you follow up on those cases and how you come up with your directives that are tailored for the particular problems of the student or family. Give specific examples of collaboration for individual attendance or behavior problems, as well as identifying patterns and appropriate change efforts to address possible systemic challenges that may impact student engagement. So you may find that a particular school, for example, has a bullying problem that is creating a barrier to attendance. In that particular case, it's not case management. You'll need to give actual advice to that school about programs that could be implemented to reduce bullying at the school. Then the last thing here is what is accomplished at meetings and between meetings to develop and maintain trust and communication among all SARB members. So there should be regular communication with your SARB members where you talk about particular SARB cases between meetings. You talk about ways that you're going to cooperate and work together for families in the district. And that's important to have in content area 3.
Okay,
Next
let's
slide.
pause for a second and see, are there any questions that people have regarding any of the first 3 content areas? I can't see the questions from the conference screen, so Barbara or Emma, if there's any questions that have popped up, this might be a good time to answer those. No questions so far. Okay, perfect. Then we'll go ahead and we'll jump into the last content area. This is a little different than the other ones because where you're responsible for writing the narratives and explaining what you're doing in content areas 1, 2, and 3. In content area 4, we are now jumping to letters of support. So on here, I just noticed that there's a typo. It's not 20 points, it's 10 points. But for content area 4, you need to provide a minimum of 3 letters of support. And as we go into the next slide, we'll be much more specific about who those letters can come from and what they need to say. But this content area, a minimum of 3 letters of support, it's worth 10 points, even though on the slide right now it says 20, it's 10. So let's take a look at what those letters need to include. So 2 of the letters of support must be from people who have directly participated in the SARB process and who are not employees of the school district. So these could be, it could be a parent, it could be a student, it could be a community member, it could be a mental health partner, it could be a community-based partner, could be a lot of different people, but a minimum of 3 letters of support. 2 of those letters have to be from people who have participated at some point in the SARB process, but are not employees of the district. At least 1 letter needs to describe site level teams that support families and students. So thinking about the perspective of the school site level. And this is where it could be helpful hearing from a parent or from a student who talks about, you know, my attendance was poor, I started receiving truancy notifications, I went to this SART meeting, I had a lot of support, I was able to turn my attendance around. That could be an example of what one of those letters might look like. The letter should also describe team efforts to resolve attendance and or behavior problems before SARB. So this would be, you know, again, another example of where that might kick in. At least 1 letter should describe actions and interventions that are carried out by the SARB panel. So you might have another letter that talks about what happens at that tier 3 SARB process or SARB meeting. So a letter describing, you know, here's typically what happens during the course of the meeting and describe what that looks like. It might be good to give an example. I mean, obviously leave names out of students, but give an example. There was, you know, a case that took place. We identified that these were the barriers. We identified these were the supports that the family needed. We linked them to these school-based or community resources, and then we saw a positive outcome from that. So you want to have 1 letter that describes things that are happening at the SARB meeting that were successful for the student. And we also need at least 1 letter that should describe reward systems for students with improved attendance and or behavior. So this could be at the site level or at the district level through something like the SARB process. So you know, just someone who can speak to that. Now, 2 letters of support have to be from people who are not employees of the district. But that other letter, if you're submitting 3 letters, can be from someone within the district. It could be from your superintendent. It could be from a district office staff. It could be from a site administrator. It could be from a counselor, a teacher, you know, could be anybody like that. But the idea is that you have a variety of people. Now, even though this section is only worth 10 points out of the entire application, for a reader and a scorer, I'll speak for myself personally, these letters are very powerful and very impactful because you're hearing from people directly who've been a part of the process and who have seen the SARB process work and can validate that the work that you're doing would make you eligible to be a model SARB. So for me, this section, even though it's the fewest number of points, is really, really powerful and really important. Just a couple tips for this in terms of the application. I would reach out and I would ask people, if you know that you want to apply to become a model SARB this year, I would start identifying who some of those people are and reach out to them as soon as possible. Give them as much time as possible to write the letter. And even though it's a minimum of 3 letters, I might try to identify 6 or 7 people. Just because when you ask someone verbally to write a letter, they may agree to it and have the best of intentions, but sometimes things happen. People get busy, people have to leave their work, and they're not able to complete the letters of support. So I think it's always safer to ask for more letters. And then once those letters come in, kind of read through them, screen them, determine, do I want to submit all 6 or 7 of these letters? Or do I want to just narrow it down to the 3 that are asked for? You don't get additional points for submitting more, but you're welcome to do that if you would like to. So give those people enough time to write the letter, identify more than what you need just to be safe. And it's okay to tell them based on the information on this slide, please make sure that you talk about our site level teams. Please make sure that you talk about what we do in SARB. Please make sure that you talk about our reward systems. So you don't write the letter for them, but you can kind of give them, please make sure that you include this information in the letter. And if they get it to you and there's some pieces of that missing, you can always reach back out to them and say, have you seen this? Could you speak to this? Could you add maybe another sentence just to make sure that you cover all of your bases? So kind of tips for this part of the application are reach out early, reach out to more that are needed, and tell them, specifically what you're looking for in their letter. This slide is just an example of different groups of people that you could reach out to that could provide those letters. Parents and students are very powerful, and please don't worry about it if they are interested in writing a letter of support, but the letter of support is not in English. CDE has the resources to get the letters translated or to have a reader who can read the letters in the native language. So please don't worry about that. If a parent is more comfortable writing down their experiences and they're positive and they're doing it in another language, not a problem. Go ahead and submit the original letter. So other people that could write letters of support, as I mentioned, administrators, counselors, teachers, other SARB panel members, your community partners, mental health partners, physical health partners, especially because of the pandemic. You probably have a very close relationship with public health and some of the other partners in your area that could write letters for you. So reach out, see who can support you with this. As I mentioned, it is, even though it's a small number of points, it's a really powerful part of the application. And sometimes in those letters of support, they're validating other things that you've said in content area 1, 2, or 3. Or maybe they've added information that you didn't put in content areas 1, 2, and 3, but kind of helps support the overall application. So this part is really important. So that's content area 4 and the letters. Now David's just going to give you a couple reminders about steps to take, timelines, and give you some contact information for us if you'd like some additional support.
So the steps to take in providing a good model SARB application are pretty simple, and I'll go through those really quickly. And I also want to give contact information for both myself and for Jennifer, because both of us are really dedicated to this program. We want to talk to people about the application and how they can become model SARBs. So the steps to take. First of all, you have to identify a team that's going to work with you. As Jennifer said earlier, this can't be done by one person alone. And it would be inappropriate for one person to do it because the SARB process is all about teamwork. So identify your team that's going to help you write the application. And then you can go through each of the content areas and brainstorm content areas for particular things that you're doing in your districts, particular interventions, particular strategies that you're using, and make sure that you identify those in one of the 4 content areas. Then, of course, you're going to just write a draft. You always start by writing a draft. Don't worry about spelling and grammar in the first draft. Just get those ideas down on paper. And then you go through and you edit your draft with fresh eyes, correct the spelling, the grammar, make sure all the sentences are concise. And then you finalize your application. And in some places, they'll hand the application over to an English teacher to kind of go through and make sure that the writing is as clear as possible and concise, and that you cover all the different criteria in the rubric. Important thing also is to remember to submit the application electronically to CDE by 4 p.m. on February 4th, 2022, because we're really strict about turning the applications in on time. And we have had applications in the past that we weren't able to accept because they came in late. And this is the contact information for myself and for Jennifer. Of course, I'm at the California Department of Education, and you can contact me at CDE through dkopperud at cde.ca.gov. My work phone number is 916-323-1028, but you can also get me through my cell phone, which is 916-717-1155. And of course, I'm working at home a lot, so sometimes my cell phone is better than my work phone. And then Jennifer can be contacted at gomeztrejo.jennifer@s4edconsultants.org. And her phone number is 310-403-4358. And there's no better person that you could ask questions to about attendance and behavior problems and school district policies than Jennifer Gomeztrejo. So I'd encourage you to talk to her if you have any questions, or of course, talk to me. We're both eager to help.
Thank you, David, for that. And we just wanted to take a minute to say thank you to the San Diego County Office of Ed and also to Live Well for inviting us to be here today. We hope that you found this useful. We hope that by breaking down the application for you step by step, you understand what you need to do to become a model SARB. You know what the revisions are from previous years so that you can work on that. As we mentioned, this is a preview because the application hasn't even officially come out on the CDE website. So we're happy to share that with you earlier. We will post this to the conference website so that you have access to the PowerPoint and can begin working on it. We would love nothing more than to see more model SARBs in San Diego County to serve as mentors to others. And now we'd like to take a minute to turn it over to Emma from Live Well Schools. She has some information to share with you. And there's some resources here on the website as well.
Thank you for the great presentation, Jennifer and David. So I'm going to quickly share one of our great resources for San Diego County school districts. So I am Emma with Live Well Schools, and I'm here to provide a short overview of a helpful online resource for those working with students in schools, after school programs, and community-based organizations. The Tools for Schools resource database was created by Live Well Schools with two goals in mind: to provide information and resources to meet the immediate needs of students, staff, and families, and to provide information and data analysis to support long-term planning for healthy schools. Based on stakeholder feedback, this resource database is now online and in a searchable format to make it easy to find resources on a wide variety of topics. So this is the homepage of our website, and it goes over some of the things that we like to focus on, especially our three key areas of chronic absenteeism, wellness policy, and LCAPs, or local control and accountability plans. At the top, you can find our toolbar where you can click for more information about focus areas and also strategies such as policy, partnerships, and programs. If you do click on our chronic absenteeism page, this provides some relevant local and state resources to address attendance in schools, and also some more information on specific data about chronic absenteeism within schools. And if you're interested in finding out more information about your school district's chronic absenteeism rate, you can also request a sample report from Live Well Schools. The key part of our website is the searchable database, and our searchable database is similar to 211's database, where you can just put in a keyword and find a resource. And so we have over 300 resources in the database, and it's now searchable by Spanish keywords as well. And so you can make it show up to 100 entries. And if we were to put something like chronic absenteeism, The database will automatically show anything that has chronic absenteeism in the description or the topic addressed. And you can just click for more information of each specific resource. And there's also things you can search for like engagement and also behavioral health or mental health. We are always looking for more resources. So if you have any, feel free to email Pam Smith and we can look into adding more resources or your resource into the database. Thank you so much for attending our presentation today on model SARBs, and we hope that you submit an application and increase San Diego County representation. Thank you so much.
As we mentioned, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you being here. If you have any additional questions regarding the application, please feel free to reach out to myself or to David. We're happy to help you through the process. Reach out to your Model SARB mentors in your county or anywhere throughout the state, and they'll be happy to assist you as well. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the conference and a wonderful Thanksgiving break. Again, thank you for joining us and best of luck to you on the applications.
Thank you very much.